In a single afternoon, an empire that called itself Roman for 1,000 years would see its heartland torn away, not by a grand invasion, but by one catastrophic mistake, born of ambition and betrayal. This is the story of the Battle of Manzikert, an event that didn't just alter the map, it changed the course of history. Welcome to Immortal History. Today we journey to the high plains of eastern Anatolia in the fateful year of 1071 for a battle that stands as a monumental crossroad in time. On a hot August afternoon, the destinies of continents were reshaped. We have an empire that still proudly called itself Roman, despite having lost Rome centuries ago. We have a dynamic and brilliant Turkish sultan from the Seljuk dynasty, whose ambitions lay elsewhere. And we have a vast Byzantine army that marched out expecting a straightforward victory. What they found instead was a disaster that would echo for centuries to come. Let's delve into the intricate story of the Battle of Manzikert. To understand Manzikert, we must first understand the powers at play. The Byzantine Empire of 1071 was a giant, though a troubled one. It controlled the Balkans, all of modern-day Turkey, and parts of southern Italy. Its mighty fleet could seal the Aegean Sea like a private lake, and its complex tax system was the envy of Europe. Constantinople, its capital, was a glittering jewel of marble palaces, wondrous churches, and even mechanical wonders. Yet this magnificent empire was suffering from deep internal decay. After the death of the formidable Emperor Basil II in 1025, a series of weak rulers and vicious political infighting had begun to corrode its foundations. The traditional military backbone of the empire, the theme system, was being systematically dismantled. For centuries, this system had provided loyal soldier farmers who defended their own lands. But the central government and powerful aristocrats, seeking to increase their own estates and tax revenues, allowed these farmer soldiers to commute their military service for a cash payment. As a result, the native army withered, forcing the empire to rely more and more on vast, expensive, and questionably loyal bands of mercenaries. Across the Caucasus, a new power was rising with ferocious energy. The Seljuk Turks, originally nomadic horsemen from Central Asia, had stormed into the Middle East. In 1055, they captured Baghdad, declaring themselves protectors of the Abbasid Caliph, and by extension masters of the Sunni Muslim world. Their leader was Alp Arslan, a name that translates to valiant lion, and he was a man of action and strategic brilliance. His primary goal was not to destroy Byzantium. He was far more concerned with his southern border and the challenge of the Shia Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt. However, the constant, semi-independent raids of Turkmen tribes into Byzantine Anatolia were carrying off not just loot and slaves, but the very belief in the empire's invincibility. In the midst of this brewing storm stood Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes. A capable general from the military aristocracy, he had ascended the throne through a dramatic turn of events. Accused of plotting a coup, he was sentenced to death, only to be pardoned by the widowed Empress Eudokia Makrembolitissa, who saw in him the strong military leader the empire desperately needed, and perhaps was infatuated with the popular general besides. Breaking her oath to her late husband never to remarry, she made Romanos emperor. But his position was precarious. He was deeply resented by powerful factions in the court, especially the influential Ducas family, who saw him as a usurper, threatening their own path to power. Romanos knew he needed a decisive, glorious military victory to silence his critics, secure his throne, and push back the Turkish threat. The clock was ticking. In the spring of 1071, Romanos gathered a massive, multi-ethnic army. Sources differ on the exact number, but it was a formidable force of perhaps 40,000 to 60,000 men. This host was a mix of professional Byzantine soldiers, Slavic, Frankish, and Norman mercenaries under commanders like Roussel de Bayol, and even Turkish auxiliaries from the Uze and Pecheneg tribes. Romanos marched his army east, a long and difficult journey, intending to restore the empire's frontier and put a definitive end to the Turkish raids. Believing Alp Arslan was far to the south dealing with the Fatimids, Romanos made a fateful decision. He divided his forces. He sent a large contingent of around 20,000 men under his general Joseph Tarchanaiotes to a nearby fortress, while he advanced on the town of Manzikert with the main body of the army. Critically, he placed the army's reserves, the rearguard, under the command of Andronikos Doukas, the nephew of his predecessor, and a man whose family loyalty was, to say the least, questionable. Alp Arslan, however, was not in Syria. Alerted to the Byzantine advance, he had force-marched his smaller, more mobile army north. He arrived in the area far sooner than Romanos expected. On August 26, 1071, the two armies faced each other on a plain near Manzikert. Romanos, confident in his numbers, rejected a peace offer from the Sultan. He deployed his forces in a classic Byzantine formation: heavy infantry in the center, cavalry on the wings, and Andronikos Doukas with the reserves in the rear. Facing them, Alp Arslan organized his highly mobile horse archers into a vast, flexible crescent. The battle began. The Byzantine line advanced like an armored train, its soldiers deflecting the relentless rain of Turkish arrows with their shields and armor. For hours, the imperial army pushed forward, driving the Seljuk center back. Then, as the afternoon wore on, Romanos, perhaps sensing a victory within his grasp, pushed his center deeper and deeper into the Seljuk formation. This was the moment Alp Arslan had been waiting for. The Turkish horsemen, masters of the feigned retreat, wheeled around with astonishing speed and began to envelop the now overextended Byzantine wings. As dust and chaos consumed the field, Romanos ordered a tactical withdrawal to regroup his lines before nightfall. It was a complex maneuver that required absolute discipline and coordination. But communication broke down. Some sources suggest the right wing misunderstood the order and fell into disarray. And at this critical moment, the ultimate betrayal occurred. Andronikos Doukas, seeing the emperor's banner in the thick of the fighting, is said to have deliberately spread the rumor that Romanos had fallen. He then led the entire reserve force, the key to the army's stability, away from the battlefield, turning his back on his emperor and leaving the main army's rear completely exposed. The result was a slaughter. The Byzantine right wing collapsed almost immediately. The left wing fought on but was soon routed. The elite Varangian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguards composed of Viking and Anglo-Saxon axemen, fought to the last man, forming a desperate wall of shields and axes around their leader. But it was hopeless. Romanos, wounded and his horse killed from under him, was overwhelmed and captured. For the first time in Byzantine history, a Roman emperor was taken prisoner by a Muslim commander. The largest imperial army in living memory disintegrated, its remnants fleeing in a desperate rout for home. Brought as a captive to Alp Arslan's tent, a humbled Romanos was treated with surprising courtesy. After a symbolic gesture where the Sultan is said to have placed his boot on the emperor's neck, Arslan raised him up. He famously asked Romanos what his fate would have been had their roles been reversed. Romanos replied grimly, "Perhaps I'd kill you or exhibit you in the streets of Constantinople." Alp Arslan's response was a masterclass in political calculation. "My punishment is far more severe. I forgive you and set you free." The terms for release seemed lenient: a hefty ransom, the surrender of a few key fortresses like Manzikert and Antioch, and a marriage alliance. It was a small price for an empire, but it was a death sentence for an emperor who had lost his army and his honor. As Romanos began his journey back to Constantinople, he discovered the gates of his own capital were closed to him. The Doukas family had seized power, proclaiming the young Michael VII as the new sole emperor. A brutal civil war erupted, pitting what was left of Romanos's loyalists against the new regime in Constantinople. A year later, Romanos was defeated, captured by his own people, and despite promises of safety, was cruelly blinded. The infection from his horrific wounds soon claimed his life, and he died in a remote monastery. The Battle of Manzikert was far more than a single military defeat. It was the first domino in a chain reaction of collapse. The civil war that followed shattered the empire's ability to defend its borders. With no imperial army to stop them, Turkish tribes poured into Anatolia, a land now without a protector. Within a single decade, the heartland of the empire, the primary recruiting ground for its soldiers and source of its food, was lost. Greek peasants fled west or submitted to new rulers, and the region began a profound and irreversible transformation. In 1077, a relative of Alp Arslan, Süleyman ibn Kutulmish founded the Sultanate of Rum, the Sultanate of Rome. The name itself was a declaration. The Turks now saw themselves as the inheritors of Roman land. Within a few decades, mosques and caravanserais stood where churches and imperial estates had once been. Desperate and broken, a later Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos would eventually knock on the door of the Pope in 1095, pleading for Western knights to help him reclaim his lost lands from the Turks. That desperate plea would ignite the First Crusade, changing the world forever. Today, the battlefield of Manzikert is a quiet pasture, marked by no grand monument, only the wind blowing across the Anatolian plains. It serves as a stark reminder that borders, faiths, and entire civilizations can shift in the space of a single sunset. Manzikert teaches us that history is rarely decided by a single clash of swords. It was a military disaster, amplified by political treachery. Alp Arslan's true victory was not won on the field alone, but was handed to him by the empire's own internal divisions, which he shrewdly understood. The battle didn't just break an army, it broke an empire's spirit and tore its heart out, setting a new course for the future of both the Christian and Islamic worlds. The defeat at Manzikert created the very conditions that made the Crusades not just possible, but seem necessary to the powers in the West. Thank you for joining us at Immortal History. If you want to continue exploring the pivotal moments that shaped our world, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Remember, history is never just the past. It is the living story of how we became who we are.